Oh no, where is my pencil? No, no, I can't feel my big pencil. My cucumber. What have you done?
The village was wrapped in a shroud of mist, like an ancient secret no one dared to uncover. Narrow streets wound through houses with cracked walls, their edges softened by time, while the air always carried an eerie, unspoken tension. There was one thing everyone agreed upon. There was something unnatural about Elia. They called her a curse, a dark omen, and no one dared approach her, not even the bravest of men. The whispers started as soon as she was old enough to turn heads, and they only grew louder as she aged. Some said she was a witch, some said she was a spirit with a vendetta, but the most terrifying part of the story was the curse that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Men who sought her out, drawn by her beauty and mystery, found themselves paying a deadly price. It wasn't that they just left her in the end, heartbroken and alone. No, they paid with their very lives. They lost their manhood first, and then they died. Nobody knew why, and nobody asked. It was just the way things were. You didn't challenge fate, and you definitely didn't challenge Elia. But then came Luca, a young traveller with a quick smile and a heart full of curiosity. Luca didn't care about the village's legends or the fear that clung to Elia. He'd seen the world, heard countless stories of curses and magic, and none of it ever seemed real to him. So when he heard the whispers in the tavern, his curiosity was piqued, not because of fear, but because something didn't quite add up. Why was everyone so terrified? What made Elia the cause of so many lost lives? He knew better than to believe in old wives' tales. In his mind, it was just superstition, something the villagers clung to because they didn't understand what was really happening. His first meeting with her was nothing like he expected. He'd been following her from a distance, watching her walk alone to the lake, where she always seemed to find solace. The mist clung to the surface of the water, and Elia stood there, her back to him, eyes lost in thought. Her silhouette was like a haunting, a figure of quiet beauty, framed by the pale moonlight. Without thinking, Luca took a step closer. "Why do you hide?" he asked, his voice breaking the stillness. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "You should stay away from me. The curse will take you too." There was something in her voice, an edge of warning mixed with resignation, like she was tired of saying it over and over again. She was used to being feared, used to being avoided. Luca wasn't afraid. "I don't believe in curses," he said, stepping closer until he stood by her side, staring at the still water. "And I don't think you should either." Her gaze hardened. "You're a fool then. You'll be like the others." His heart pounded. The weight of her words lingered in the air between them, but Luca wasn't deterred. "I don't think I will," he said, a quiet conviction in his voice. She sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. "You don't know what you're getting into." He had no idea, honestly. But something about her pain and the way she spoke, made him feel like he had to understand. She wasn't just a cursed woman. She was someone who had lived with this burden for years, alone, isolated by a fear that wasn't even her fault. Days passed, and Luca found himself seeking her out. He couldn't help it. There was a pull, a gravity that drew him to her. He would watch her from the distance at first, as she wandered the village or sat by the lake. And eventually they started talking, little by little, as if she couldn't help but share a piece of herself with him. She told him of the men who had come before him, the ones who had sought her out, each one drawn by her beauty, her mystery, her promise of something more. But every man who had fallen for her, every one who had dared to try and claim her, had lost something far worse than just their lives. They had lost their manhood first, and then they had died. And nobody questioned it, not even when it was happening right in front of them. Luca listened carefully, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "But why?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire. The village was quiet, the only sound the crackling of wood in the hearth. "Because I'm cursed," she said, her voice flat. like she had said it 1,000 times before and had grown tired of repeating it. Luca could see the pain in her eyes, the hopelessness that had settled in her heart. "But that's not fair," he said softly. "You don't deserve this." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to see if he was telling the truth or just another man who thought he could save her. "You don't know anything about me. No one does. The curse doesn't care about fairness." He shook his head, determined. "I don't care about curses. I care about you." The words hung in the air between them, thick with emotion. And for the first time, Alaya let her guard down just a little. "I've never met anyone like you," she whispered. As the days passed, Luca continued to stay by her side. He didn't try to fix anything, didn't push her to explain more than she was ready to. He simply stayed because he knew she needed someone who wasn't afraid. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a blend of fading pinks and purples, Alaya seemed distant, lost in a quiet kind of thought. She sat by the edge of the lake, her eyes fixed on the stars above, a deep, unspoken sadness lingering in her gaze. The cool evening breeze swirled around her, gently tugging at her hair, but she barely seemed to notice. It was like she was somewhere far away, in a place of her own thoughts that no one else could touch. Luca watched her for a while, sitting just a few feet away, unsure of how to approach her. There was something about the way she stared at the sky, as though searching for answers in the endless expanse above them, that made him hesitant. It wasn't fear. He wasn't afraid of her or her curse, despite everything he'd heard. It was more like respect. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, still standing, still fighting, still alive. After a few moments, unable to stand the distance between them anymore, Luca shifted slightly closer, his shoulder brushing against hers, ever so lightly. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like a bridge, like a way to reach her in the midst of whatever was pulling her so deep into herself. Without looking at him, she murmured, "I wish things were different." Luca didn't speak right away, his mind turning over her words, his heart aching for her. There was so much pain behind them, pain she hadn't even voiced, but that he could feel, just beneath the surface. She didn't need to say much for him to understand. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing against hers at first. But when Alaya didn't pull away, he slowly intertwined his hand with hers, feeling the coldness of her skin. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly in his grip, but she didn't withdraw, and that gave him hope. "Do you ever wish things could be different?" he asked, his voice soft, barely a whisper. His words hung in the cool air like a secret shared between the two of them, something that neither of them could take back, even if they wanted to. For a long moment, Alaya didn't answer. She just stared up at the sky, her eyes distant, as if searching for something far beyond the stars. Then, slowly, her voice broke through the silence. "Every day," she said, her words heavy with the weight of years, maybe even lifetimes, of longing. Luca's heart clenched. He wanted to say something to make it all better, to tell her that things could change, that they would change. But how could he? He wasn't sure he had the right words for something so broken. The next day, things shifted. They sat together by the lake again, as they had done so many times before. But this time, there was a quiet change in the air, like something had finally clicked into place. Alaya turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of vulnerability and resolve, as though she had made a decision to finally speak her truth. "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca leaned in, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. This wasn't just another conversation. She was about to reveal something important, something that might change everything. "I've lived with this curse my entire life," Alaya began, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "But it's not mine. It was never my curse to bear." He could feel his confusion building, but he stayed quiet. letting her speak. My mother, Amara. She was from this village. She wanted a child more than anything. She and my father tried for years, but she couldn't have one. The village started to turn on her after a while. They whispered that something was wrong with her, that she would never give my father a child. And I think it broke her. I think she became desperate. Luca leaned forward, his interest piqued. He had heard snippets of Amara's story before, the woman who had been so desperate for a child that she'd given up everything for it. But what Elia was about to reveal was something he'd never expected. One day, she met Oceana, Elia continued, her eyes unfocused as she spoke. The goddess of the lake, the one people speak of in hushed voices. She paused, as if the name alone carried a weight, and she begged for a child. She promised anything in return, anything at all, if Oceana would grant her wish. Luca felt a shiver crawl up his spine at the mention of the goddess's name. He had heard stories, ancient tales about Oceana and the power she wielded, but he had never thought them to be anything more than fables. And Oceana agreed, Elia said, her voice barely audible now. But there was a price. The child would be born with a curse, one that would not be broken until a man with pure, unconditional love came into her life. A man who loved her for who she was, not for her beauty, not for what she could offer, but for her. That was the bargain. Luca could feel the weight of her words sink in. He had known Elia's story was complicated, but this was something else entirely. When Elia was born, Amara's joy was clouded by the knowledge of the curse that her child carried. But Amara didn't tell her. She kept it hidden, thinking it was a secret she could protect Elia from. But as Elia grew older, the curse began to take its toll. Men came, and men died. All of them. Each one drawn by her beauty, by the myth that surrounded her, but none of them ever staying long enough to truly love her. And with each man, Elia felt more and more the weight of a life she hadn't chosen. There were always signs, Elia said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. The way they looked at me, the way they came, wanting something more than just my company. It was never about me. It was always about what they could take from me. Luca squeezed her hand gently, but she wasn't finished. My mother confessed it to me one night, Elia continued. She told me that she had bargained with the goddess, that this curse, this thing that had followed me my entire life, was a result of her desperation. She said she never meant for this to happen. She only wanted me to have a chance at life. Elia, I never meant for any of this to happen, her mother had said, breaking down in front of her one night, tears streaming down her face. I only wanted to give you life. But it wasn't just my life that was taken, was it? Elia had asked softly, the hurt and betrayal seeping through her words. Amara had nodded, her face crumpling with guilt. I didn't know what I was bargaining for. I didn't know the price. The weight of those words hit Elia like a thunderclap. She had always thought the curse was hers to bear, hers to fight. But the truth was so much darker. Her mother's choice had tied Elia to this fate, a fate that had never been hers to decide. A deep silence filled the space between them as Elia closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. But now I understand, she said, her voice shaking slightly. The curse will only be broken when someone loves me, truly, deeply. Not because of my beauty or the mystery around me, but because they see me. For me. But the problem is, I don't know if anyone can ever love me like that, without fear, without seeing me as a monster. I've never had that. Luca looked at her, his heart full of something fierce and unwavering. You don't have to worry about that anymore, he said gently. I'm not afraid of you, Elia. I don't see you as a curse. I see you as you. And I don't know what's in the past, but I know this. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. That night, everything changed. As they stood by the lake, the moonlight casting a soft glow on their faces, Luca took her hands in his gaze unwavering. His voice was steady, full of conviction as he spoke the words that would set them both free. "We can break this," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Together, we face it. We face the truth. And we don't let the curse win." The water shimmered, and out of the depths of the lake, Oceana appeared. Her form rose like a vision, glowing with ethereal light. She looked at Elia and Luca with a slow, knowing smile. "The curse is broken," she said simply, her voice like a soft whisper in the wind. "For love has triumphed." Elia's heart swelled with a sudden, overwhelming sense of freedom. The weight she had carried for so long lifted from her chest, and for the first time in her life, she felt lighter. Her heart was no longer bound by the chains of the past, and in that moment, she knew that nothing could hold her back anymore. The village, once fearful of her, now saw her differently. They no longer whispered behind her back, no longer feared her presence. Instead, they welcomed her, Elia, the woman who had once been a curse but was now a symbol of hope. And as Elia and Luca stood together beneath the stars, surrounded by those who had once feared her, they knew that their love was stronger than anything that had come before. The curse was gone, and in its place there was only the promise of a future filled with love, hope, and endless possibility. Together they walked into a new beginning. Thank you for tuning in to this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on future stories. We'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your feedback means the world to us.